is that they are scrapping and grasping at straws because they have nothing else. Laugh at them. Stephen Miller is a clown. I've never seen that guy in real life, but he looks like he's like 4'10", and he looks like he is angry about the fact that he's 4'10", and he looks like he is so mad that he is 4'10", that he's taking that anger out at any other population possible. Like, laugh at them. Laugh at them. Yes, they are dangerous. Yes, we're here to be strong for one another.
Democratic president someday calls the National Guard to a red state over what they see as open rebellion, but is what amounts to a demonstration that gets rowdy. I mean, is that not a fear of yours?
And they're posting pictures of their kids because it's a demonstration, and they have a sniper on top of a building firing a high-caliber rifle at a nice facility because it's a demonstration, and they are engaging in vehicle ramming attacks.
But the National Guard isn't being sent to Texas.
Because it's a
the National Guard
demonstration.
isn't being sent to Dallas, where that sniper was.
Because the Dallas Police Department and the governor of Texas, well, you walked right into that one, have responded to every call for assistance and help. They gave a stand-down order in Chicago, and they gave a stand-down order in Portland.
Boy. So we got to talk about White House Deputy Chief of Staff Stephen Miller, who threw down with CNN's Boris Sanchez, who is apparently going to be defending Antifa domestic terrorism, right? Because that is what the media is doing when they pretend as if these violent riots that we've seen happening in liberal cities across the country because of their hatred of ICE, because of the rhetoric coming from the Democrat Party, when the mainstream liberal media pretends like these riots aren't riots and that they're not violent, they're gaslighting. And this type of gaslighting gives an excuse to these domestic extremists to continue their acts of violence and chaos. And the Trump administration is done with it. And they're especially done with the games from Democrats, again, defending this domestic terrorism. Okay. And that leads me to this video. Okay. This awesome exchange on CNN between Stephen Miller and their woke anchor, in which this guy is going to pretend as if what Antifa is doing is not really that bad, right? So without further ado, let's go ahead and get into this.
We're back out live with White House Deputy Chief of Staff for Policy, Stephen Miller. Stephen, I sincerely apologize for that technical difficulty. It seems like some wires got crossed. You were describing the president's legal authority as you see it under Title 10. My question was whether the administration still plans to abide by that judge's order restricting any National Guard troops from being sent to Oregon.
Well, the administration will abide by the ruling insofar as it affects the covered parties, but there are also many other options the president has to deploy federal resources and assets out of the U.S. military to Portland. But I was making the point that under federal law, Section Title 10 of the U.S. Code, the president has the authority anytime he believes federal resources are insufficient to federalize the National Guard to carry out a mission necessary for public safety. So it's important to understand that in Portland, ICE officers have been subjected to over 100 nights of terrorist assault, doxing, murder threats, violent attack, and every other means imaginable to try to overturn the results of the last election through violence. The most important point I want to make today is that the number 1 and 2 items in the GOP platform in 2024 were to turn back the border invasion and carry out the largest deportation program in American history. Since Inauguration Day, there's been an orchestrated campaign of terrorism and violence against ICE officers. Of course, we saw the recent sniper attack against ICE officers. They're publishing their families' photos online. They're threatening them with murder. They're threatening them with death. And they're physically attacking them in the street each and every day. And yet, shamefully, the mayor and governor in Portland and Oregon have refused to render aid, leaving ICE officers to street fight every single night against these terrorists.
Wow. I love this guy. I don't know about you guys, but Stephen Miller is definitely the most based member of President Trump's cabinet, right? I can see why leftists can't stand this guy, right? Because he's awesome. Every single time he's on national television, he is awesome, okay? I love the way that he just calmly tells the plain truth and dismantles the narrative from the mainstream liberal media with examples, right? With support and elaboration, right? Like, for example, he is referencing the U.S. code, right, which allows the president to use the National Guard in situations like what is happening in Portland, where you have ICE agents under attack. And as Stephen Miller states that, hey, if they don't have sufficient resources, then the president can call in the National Guard in order to protect them, right, to ensure public safety. And I think at this point, from what we've seen in Portland and Chicago as well, too, yeah, it's about time, right? It is about time. And that is the trap that these woke rioters have fell into. This is why I've been telling you guys that that's what this is, right? It is a trap. And Democrats have fell into the trap because they support these woke lefties, these lunatics that are committing these acts of violence. And acts of violence against ICE, again, gives the president an excuse to now bring in the National Guard, right? Because that's the loophole. The loophole is if ICE can show evidence that, hey, we're under attack, that we can't carry out our job safely without the National Guard, that we need military help, that allows the president to unilaterally send in the National Guards. And again, this is easy stuff, right? It's easy to play the leftists because they're violent, right? They're prone to violence. And that is why they knew that that's what would happen. And that's why President Trump is now calling in the National Guard. Again, this is chess, not checkers, right? This is chess, not checkers. That's what the liberal media and Democrats and leftists are finding out.
You make the claim of terrorist assaults and violence attack over 100 nights, and yet the judge overseeing this case says that that's untethered from reality. And local officials on the ground say that Trump's assertion of what's happening is in Portland, that it's war-ravaged and burning to the ground, is far from true. I looked at the police data, and police have made something like 70 total arrests since June. And there are no reports of buildings being burned to the ground. The White House cited a guillotine being rolled out as like a public display of rebellion. But there isn't actually a threat that these demonstrators are going to overthrow the government. Are you concerned that that response weakens your legal argument?
Yo, did this guy say that about January 6th? Right? Like, listen to this guy. Well, see, they rolled a guillotine out there in front of an ICE facility. But hey, it's not that big of a deal, right? It's not a guillotine. A guillotine. And here's seeing it. Well, see, it's not really an issue. Like, come on. Are they really overthrowing the government? Again, where was this energy on January 6th? Right? Were they really going to overthrow the government? No. Right? There was zero chance of the protesters on January 6th overthrowing the government. But did CNN say that to their audience? No. Right? They told their audience this was an insurrection. Those guys were this close to taking over the United States of America. Okay? Now you got Antifa out of control, right? Taking over, like literally taking over a block, a whole neighborhood, right? In Portland, okay? And again, people say, oh, it's just one block. Bruh, we shouldn't have any domestic extremists taking over a block, right? Like a public property, a street. That shouldn't happen at all, okay? But anyways, now that you have Antifa, participating in these acts of domestic terrorism, CNN is trying to sanitize it and pretend like, oh, well, it's not that big of a deal. Again, this is shameful stuff.
No, they are actually, as we speak, trying to overthrow the core law enforcement function of the federal government. Boris, this is, I think, where we're talking past each other. When ICE officers have to street battle against Antifa, hand-to-hand combat every night to come and go from their building, when they try to exit in a vehicle, when they are swarmed and surrounded and they try to tip the vehicle over, when people bring weapons to an ICE facility to try to engage in direct violent assault against ICE officers, what is the purpose? It is to prevent immigration and customs enforcement from carrying out the mission the American people elected them to do. Their objective is to make it impossible for ICE to carry out ICE enforcement. When in our history have we tolerated unlawful riotous assemblies night after night around FBI buildings or ATF buildings or DEA buildings? This is the textbook definition of domestic terrorism, using the actual and imminent threat of violence to keep federal officials from doing their jobs. And unless we send in troops and resources, then we will continue to bleed federal law enforcement resources in these street battles. It's absurd, it's unconstitutional, and must be put down.
You cited Title 10 a moment ago, and under that statute, you need either a foreign invasion, a domestic rebellion, or a disturbance that inhibits the ability for law enforcement to carry out federal law.
Well, what do you think that is, my guy? Right? That's exactly what that is. That's why I just explained to you guys, right? I just explained to you guys that the attacks against law enforcement, federal law enforcement, from these domestic extremists now opens up the door for the president to use the military. This was a trap. And listen, the media is trying to pretend like the president doesn't have legal footing here, but he does. As the CNN anchor just explained, right? He realized while he was reading that, oh, shoot, they're actually right, right? That's why they now have to downplay it. So now they got to downplay it and say, see, it's not really that bad. A guillotine, not really that bad.
But ICE is still conducting operations. Like the facility hasn't been overrun. It seems like local officials are fairly in control of the operation if ICE is still able to execute its mission, is it not?
Do you have any idea how much of ICE's workforce and resources have had to be reprioritized? How much of the Joint Terrorism Task Force's resources have had to be reprioritized to fight these domestic terrorists? Do you have any idea how many resources are spent
Steven, you keep
trying
calling
to
them
hunt down and
terrorists, but
track
isn't that hyperbolic to call them terrorists?
What is? If anything, I'm understating the severity of the situation. What issue was more central in 2024 than turning back the border invasion? And since the day we came in, ICE officers have been subjected to a nonstop campaign of physical violence and harassment every single day. And outside the Portland field office in particular, every night, they come, they assemble, they fight, they try to impede movement, they physically attack. For what purpose? Because we had an election, Boris, we had one. What's the purpose? To use actual physical violence to change the result of the election, to say you cannot turn back the border invasion. Do you have any idea how many resources we have had to redesignate to deal with these street terrorists?
You explain that. Let me ask the question. Let me ask the question. You make the case that these are terrorists, but in what we've seen thus far, the actual incidents of people inciting violence and not responding to law enforcement attempting to disperse them are not an open rebellion. I mean, again, you make this characterization as though they're terrorists, and I do wonder if it is potentially a problem in the future for Republicans. If a Democratic president someday calls the National Guard to a red state over what they see as open rebellion, but is what amounts to a demonstration that gets rowdy. I mean, is that not a fear of yours?
And they're posting pictures of their kids because it's a demonstration, and they have a sniper on top of a building firing a high-caliber rifle at a nice facility because it's a demonstration, and they are engaging in vehicle ramming.
But the National Guard isn't being sent to Texas.
Because it's a
the National Guard isn't being sent to Dallas, where that sniper was.
Because the Dallas Police Department and the governor of Texas, well, you walked right into that one, have responded to every call for assistance and help. They gave a stand-down order in Chicago, and they gave a stand-down order in Portland. Do you realize that there's 11,000 federal law enforcement officers in Oregon? That's larger than the size of the FBI. Local and state police are resourced to deal with this kind of riotous assembly, but they have refused. They've been given a stand-down order. So
they've arrested some 70 people since June. They've been arresting folks on the ground. They've been arresting folks on the ground. They refute what you're saying outright.
We literally have the 911 audio of the stand-down order in Chicago, and we have documented inside of DHS every single unresponded to 911 call over the recent weeks and months. Let me present you with a counterfactual. And I know you're doing your best to try to be even-handed here, but think about this for a second.
Being even-handed. Yeah, I don't know about all of that. But my question to this CNN anchor would have been, what level of violence is acceptable? Right? What level is acceptable? Because what you're telling me, what we're seeing right now, obstruction, people literally blocking ICE from leaving the facility, that's acceptable. You think that's acceptable? They should put up with that on a nightly basis. Almost being ran over, right? Ran over, getting shot at, assassination attempts, street fights, right? Like, oh, that's acceptable. They should have to put up with that every night. That's just a part of the job. That's just what they got to deal with, right? According to CNN, not domestic terrorism. Now, again, if these were right-wingers, doing this, right? And some Planned Parenthood, do you think that they would say, oh, well, see, it's not that big of a deal, right? It's just a little rowdy, right? Just a little rowdy, some right-wingers outside of Planned Parenthood with a guillotine, okay? And, shooting at people, not letting vehicles leave, right? Not letting people come in to get abortions, okay? Yeah, no big deal, right? Nothing to see here. No, CNN would never do that. And Stephen Miller brought up a great point about how these obstructions are costing taxpayers money, right? It's making operations less efficient. And because of that, you have to put more resources into it. And that costs us money, right? So, this CNN anchor is doing his best to defend Antifa. And the reason why I think this is important to note is because all of these individuals, I believe a lot of these individuals in the media probably consider themselves to be Antifa.
Joe Biden let 15, 20 million illegal aliens into the country. Pick your number. It doesn't matter for the purpose of this. What do you think would have happened if anti-migration demonstrators had assembled outside of every Border Patrol and ICE facility for year after year, physically attacking every ICE officer and border agent who is releasing illegal aliens, physically attacking the immigration lawyers representing illegal aliens, physically attacking the personnel at DHS, setting migrants free by the millions into our country? What do you think would have happened? You think that the response would have been measured? You think it would have been light? They would have had the military in every single facility protecting these federal officers. We shouldn't have to take all of the FBI, DEA, and ATF agents out of their desks, off their jobs, not prosecuting and pursuing cases of urgent national security because the Portland police won't respond, the Chicago police won't respond. The numbers that we need can only come from the National Guard. ICE officers should not have to live in constant fear of death. You say that I'm not using the right term. What would you describe? An organized campaign of violence, fear, intimidation, and doxing, including attacks by sniper, attacks by vehicle ramming. What would you call that, whose sole aim and objective is to disable the functions of an entire federal law enforcement agency, if not domestic terrorism? What other term would apply?
Do you have evidence that this campaign is coordinated? Are you planning charges on anyone who is actually coordinating said campaign?
He can't answer that question. He can't answer that question because there's no other way to describe what we're seeing from these left-wing extremists other than domestic terrorism, as Stephen Miller just eloquently laid out on CNN's airways, right? This is why he's responding to the question with a question, because he knows that, what Stephen Miller just said was factually accurate, right, and undisputable.
Pain.
Yes. So since the Joint Terrorism Task Force has gotten involved, we found that there are common funding, that there is common financing, that there are meeting points, that is
what you're
carefully
describing
orchestrated,
as actual
it is carefully
terrorism.
integrated. Yes.
And you are going to charge someone with terrorism.
Well, so I would like to.
I bet you would like to, but that doesn't mean you're going to. Are you?
No. What I'm saying to you is the Congress has statutes on seditious conspiracy, on insurrection, on impeding federal law enforcement. The domestic terrorism statute in Congress obviously needs to be strengthened for domestic terrorism in Congress. We have foreign terrorism charges. We have an entire patchwork of federal laws. To the extent that there are charges that apply, we will charge them in every single case. You have impeding law enforcement, you have seditious conspiracy, you have a conspiracy to deprive of rights, you have assault against law enforcement officers. But all of this meets the hallmark, textbook definitions of domestic terrorism. Boris, I just want you, just for a moment, to step back and think about what we're talking about here. President Trump ran and won a campaign on turning back the border invasion.
You've said that several times, Stephen.
Yeah, so you see that, you heard that. Based Stephen Miller, right? Based Stephen Miller. I think he did an excellent job there, airing some truth, right, out on CNN. I know that their audience of just a few people, just a few individuals, right, at an airport. I know they don't usually hear that type of truth, but ultimately, what Stephen Miller said was factually accurate. And again, Democrats have fell into a trap by allowing their domestic extremists to commit acts of violence, right? Cheering it on, not condemning it, okay, making excuses for it. And that has now opened up the doorway for the president to potentially send in the military. And he's probably going to be justified in doing so because we have on video these crazy acts of violence being committed against ICE in these liberal cities for simply doing their jobs. Now, again, none of this would be happening if these Democrats decided to actually cooperate with the federal government to enforce federal law. None of this will be happening. So anybody that's upset with what appears to be chaos that is happening in this country, right, when it comes to illegal immigration, there's nobody else to blame except the Democrat Party. That is it. So let me know what you guys think. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. Most importantly, share a Black conservative perspective. Peace.